Welcome, everybody, to Left Reckoning. David here, joined as always by Matt Leck. We got a big one for y'all today. We have the conversation coming up with Graham Platner, and I'll tell you what, it really surprised me, and I'm looking forward to hearing everybody's reactions to it. But Matt, before we get to that interview and to some of these other stories, how are you doing today?
I'm doing very well, David. Good to be with you.
Yeah, man. I mean, I'm really looking forward to sharing this Graham conversation. We'll definitely have more opportunities to talk about it soon. We talk about his military record. We talk about Medicare for All. We talk about his thoughts on the Democratic Party. Some things that I think will surprise a lot of folks. They surprise me. It's a really rich conversation.
If any news aggregators like the New York Times or something like that, just make sure you do put Left Reckoning when you do cite the breaking news here.
But yeah, so that's coming up in just a little bit. But before we get there, Matt, I mean, there's a lot more to talk about regarding this Texas Democratic Party Senate primary. And let me start with something, kind of a pitch for what we'll be doing over the weekend. James Tallarico went on that Jubilee show, which is, I have kind of mixed feelings about that whole enterprise. But it was a very interesting conversation. He went and he spoke to, I believe, 20 undecided voters. And it really did highlight some of the things that Tallarico is best at, which is in a kind of structured debate setting, putting out a pretty clear and coherent view of the world, even to people who might not share his beliefs. We would play some of it and get into that here, but unfortunately, some of these new media companies like Jubilee make it really difficult for us to do that, which is a bit of a shame, especially as we see more and more politicians pivoting, I think, correctly towards new media to see the way that these organizations act to kind of news organizations and political content. But we'll have that in depth on the Sunday show, patreon.com/Left Reckoning, to get access to it. So there'll be more Tallarico talk. But last week, Matt, we talked a little bit about Jasmine Crockett, who announced at the last minute that she'd be running for Senate, something that we've been predicting on this program for a while. Go ahead, yeah.
David, I would just like to start, I know we want to get to the hard-hitting stuff, but with some words of affirmation. Mm-hmm. Because some people don't quite... I get a little bit uneasy with this sort of criticism of our Democratic candidate. So I would just like to say up top, we want the Republicans to lose. Whether it's Tallarico or Crockett.
Yeah.
If one of them could win, I would very much welcome it. Now, that wouldn't necessarily mean I would come to expect them to be necessarily an ally for progress, although in each case, an argument could be made that, they could bring something like that to the table. But we do want them to beat Republicans for this race. Now, analysis
no doubt about it.
Exactly. And I think there's some people that need to hear that before they can hear the rest of this.
Yeah, well, I mean, just if we're saying that, I mean, that's why this matters. In fact, like a lot of the criticism about Crockett is not just that people have doubts about whether she will be able to win against a Cornyn or Paxton. And I think at this point, we haven't seen anything from her to make me believe that she has the capacity to win in a general election. Where it really will affect things down the line is in all of those other races across the state of Texas. If you have somebody like Crockett who's going to be sitting at the most prolific, the most covered, the most animated race, and she's somebody who is saying things like Latinos have a slave mentality, yeah, that's going to affect how many people, for example, in South Texas, a part of the state that has been trending more and more Republican election after election. Yes, that will affect how it goes. So no, it does matter. Even if it's not just like, oh, if they're both likely to lose, who knows? We'll just see what happens. It does matter down ballot too, especially who's kind of leading at the top of the ticket. And I don't know, anybody who needs their handheld. In politics, I don't know. I think you need to grow up, frankly. We need to criticize people who want to, I don't know, be in elected office. I think it's your duty and job, especially if you do political media content. But yeah, should we get into this a little bit, Matt? I appreciate the disclaimer at the top, though.
Let's do it. Yes. Words of affirmation.
And we'll be covering this in depth, I'm sure, over the next few weeks as the primary continues to heat up. But, last week we talked basically as Crockett had entered the race. Since then, there's been a few media stories, and we wanted to be able to kind of catch everybody up, particularly on these two major issues. One is her opinions on Gaza, her relationships with Israel, and the other one is her past statements about Latino voters who voted for Trump, where she said that they have a, quote, slave mentality. She said this, by the way, in an interview with Vanity Fair. We talked about this all last week. You can watch the whole episode if you want to hear our full thoughts there. But I would also just add to this that it wasn't just, oh, she said slave mentality. She also kind of like created a hierarchy of races as to who is good and who is bad, which I just think is just a very miserable way to engage in politics. And I just don't think is a winner. Frankly,
it's a miserable one, but it's one if you don't, approach things the way like Zoran did, which is immediately after Trump won, go out and ask people in even like heavily Latino districts, hey, why did you vote for Trump or why didn't you vote for Trump? Taking them seriously. If you're not going to take them seriously as people, how else do you engage with them? Well, for many of our politicians, it is ethnicities or demographics that they can like poll, and I'm sorry that it has a limited use.
Yeah, well, no, exactly, and maybe we'll get to her response here. I have this is from the Texas Take podcast with Jeremy Wallace, who's a reporter at the Houston Chronicle. We'll play a little bit of this. This is her kind of responding to this claim that again that she made publicly, that the Latinos have a slave mentality. And I think the way that she kind of interacts with this, Matt, is not only, and again, last week we put out our video on her where we said, is she the anti-Zoran? Because what she's doing is so opposite of what was successful for Zoran, where Zoran, again, was listening to people, talking to people. This clip as well, sorry to front load it, but this clip as well, she's not really going to do much apologizing or much listening. In fact, it's going to come from a position of, I kind of saw through this. I knew better than everybody else, which again, I don't know, just doesn't inspire confidence. But let's play a little bit of this, give her due.
Vote for Trump.
Yeah, so I'm going to be clear about this. I love my brothers and sisters in the brown community. I always have. And my actions speak to that. And so people can point to one article and interpret it whatever way they want to. But the reality is that when we look at what's taking place specifically in brown communities around this country, I have been there side by side, if not out front, making sure that I am calling a thing. What's happening right now in this country is a travesty. And so, yes, I do think that it sucks that so many people voted for Donald Trump, and this is what he decided to do to their communities. And frankly, I've talked to plenty of people that also think that may not have been the greatest thing. But here's the thing. He is a con man. He cons people. He told them he was going to go after the bad people. And I knew better. I knew that he was going to do what he had always done. This is a guy that was locking children in cages in his first administration. So I trusted and believed his actions and not his words. And so as we see what's happening in the community, you can look at the bills that I filed, whether we're talking about making sure that immigrants in general are safe, whether they're at church, whether they're at school, whether they're at hospitals. You can look at my advocacy as I serve on the immigration subcommittee and know that I am always standing lockstep with our brown brothers and sisters. That's just the reality. My actions and my record speak very clearly about where I stand.
Look, and totally correct to note that, what Donald Trump is doing to people in this country is an absolute travesty. No doubt about it. But again, this is part of something that I think we're going to hit a lot on this segment. It's a kind of a refusal to do any kind of self-reflection as to where you made a mistake. So again, like there's no real like apology, no real reflection. In fact, what we get there again is I saw through it. I knew better. And not a particularly a deep amount of substance either when it comes to the issues at hand. And sorry, and I would just say one last thing. Again, a relationship to voters that I think is very worrying and frankly problematic, where instead of kind of taking their concerns or even saying, hey, we failed. If people are voting for Trump, who is saying he's going to do all these horrible things, they're voting for Trump over my team, my party. We're probably doing something wrong. None of that. It's you know, these people should have been lining up behind us and they made a mistake. And I know there'll be some people who watch this video and they'll be like, well, yeah, they did. And they did. And it's like, yeah, well, you guys are bad at politics. This is why the Democratic Party has utterly failed. And we have come into a situation where some of the most vile, disgusting, and discredited movements are in power again because y'all act like you know, automatically should be getting votes instead of going out there and winning them.
Yeah, it's you should have listened to us versus what, like we said with Zoran, go out and listen to the voters. And nothing from the 3-minute clip that I saw of Zoran talking to people in Queens made me think, oh yeah, these people have a slave mentality. Like, we can be objective. Crockett, to her credit, said ICE was similar to slave catchers. I agree, like that is a historically apt comparison. But what she did there was literally pathologize voters that she needs to win instead of engaging with what the problem is. And then to say like, well, I knew better, you should have known better too. Why didn't they, Jasmine? Like, what is it about the party? And it's like, you know, we talked with Graham Platner later about like the Democratic Party and it's sort of failing. It's like, what is it? And that's why Zoran won, and why like Barack Obama is like letting the New York Times know that he called it, because that there's a fundamental severance that has happened between the Democratic Party and the voters, and the way clear is obvious. Is you have to take them seriously as people, as your fellow citizens, not just as like people to be manipulated on spreadsheets using certain messages across media. These are citizens. Treat them like citizens. And this sort of like my stance of certain communities, like, I don't know, man. Maybe that will work, but it's not impressive to me.
It's not impressive. And I'll just tell folks this right now. Again, Crockett is undoubtedly the front runner in this race. The polling has kind of shown that to be the case. Not that it's a runaway. And one of the biggest negatives or hurdles that Tallarico has when you look at the polling is most people don't know who he is, right? He has had a head start. You know, you'd expect maybe a little bit more awareness, but that's the reality here. One of the groups, though, where Tallarico is very much outperforming Crockett so far has been with Hispanic voters here in Texas. He's going to be holding a rally with Bobby Pulido, who's running in South Texas, a famous Tejano music star. You know, and I think that just kind of shows Tallarico's kind of ability to kind of win that vote. So it's going to be interesting to see what ends up happening. And what we're seeing again from Crockett here is not really somebody who seems to have the capacity or the interest to really kind of break through all of this. And again, you know, we have some other things to get to, but this is part of a way that she kind of engages with politics, and I think is an important thing to note. That when it comes to these kind of questions about her record, questions about her statement, she is very, like, just frankly, like, annoyed that these things are even being brought up in the first place.
It is the main issue, and all Democrats agree with it now, that the affordability crisis, and by the way, it's not new that Democrats can acknowledge the affordability crisis. The Affordable Care Act is named the Affordable Care Act. Whether they can actually do something about it is the big question. But everyone knows that this is the big issue with the loss, is we didn't speak to people. So it is supremely unhelpful to be using things like they have to be psychoanalyzing entire groups of people saying they have a slave mentality is crazy. You should apologize for it and figure out a way to actually take them seriously.
And again, I will just say, as a Texan, and as somebody who watches and follows Texas politics very closely, especially about Hispanic voters in Texas, because that is a community in this state that has for a long time been taken for granted by the Democratic Party, right? They have regularly, this was called the Blue Wall, right? That broke for Trump. And look, yeah, you know, it is amazing that Trump's able to kind of get these inroads, knowing what his politics are. That shows how bad and how disappointed and how frustrated folks are. And also, let's not forget, too, the lack of investment in that part of the state and the country, one by the government, but two by the Democratic Party, right? People who were in 2024 and in 2022 and in 2020 were saying, hey, the Republicans are making moves here. Y'all need to spend resources here and engage with these communities because they think they can win and they might be able to do it. And they were ignored statewide, and they were certainly ignored nationally, right? So then saying in 2026, they're going to run a candidate who's saying this kind of stuff and won't back down from it. I don't know. It doesn't really send the message that the Democratic Party has kind of heard these things. And I will just say one thing, and we got to move over to these other things, but I will also just say, look at the difference between, we'll talk about this on Sunday in our bonus episode at patreon.com/leftreckoning. Tallarico is able to say during this Jubilee talk, Matt, that like he disagrees and thinks that Biden and the Democratic Party very much failed on immigration. And having the capacity to be able to do that in general is good, but especially in a place like Texas, which again had shown the Republicans have dominated politics here for almost 3 decades, over 3 decades. And we've also seen the Republican Party continue to gain with non-white voters, right? And, I think that's the one thing that the Democratic Party and people who've been engaged in politics for a long time really need to kind of revise their rhetoric, because the idea the Republican Party only has white voters is just not true anymore. And it's very dangerous to kind of operate from that assumption. But should we get to this Gaza thing, unless you had anything else to add here? Because again, this is going to be a little bit of a longer clip, but I want to play it because I want to give her due. We talked about this last week. Where does Jasmine Crockett stand on Israel? And what we said on this program is that she's not good on it. She's not like a flaming, right winger John Fetterman or anything like that. But she's not a leader on this. She's very much like kind of mainstream Democratic Party. And again, do you expect if you were to grab a Democrat out of a hat, that they're going to be particularly good on Gaza? No, your expectation is not, because the Democratic Party, unlike their base, continues to stand with the genocidal regime, continue to stand with apartheid. So Crockett might be getting annoyed because she's slightly better than some of the most bloodthirsty members of her own party. But again, this is going to show a frustration that she has when people kind of investigate and ask her about her record. She might say this in this clip. She said it in a few other clips and conversations she's had with Texas reporters. But again, she keeps on calling people asking about her record on Gaza and on many of these other questions, quote, coordinated attacks. Which again, I just find to be completely disqualifying for somebody running for office. If people start asking questions about what they believe, what their stances are, and criticizing them for positions that they've taken. Let's play this and we can get into it. But I just find that to be, disqualifying. And this is again from Jeremy Wallace.
Is that there was a coordinated attack on me on social media that was mischaracterizing my position. So I will be clear. There were people that said I was endorsed by AIPAC. I'm not endorsed by AIPAC. I never have been endorsed by AIPAC. There were people that were upset because there was someone that took a clip from an interview that I did during the vice presidential debate where I was in the spin room, so well over a year ago, and they intentionally cut the interview. I was asked about a supplemental package in April of that year, and I said I voted for all the supplementals, and then it cut off. Well, the supplemental package in April, which again can be confirmed just by looking it up, nobody has to believe my words, that supplemental package was for defensive help to Israel, as well as it was for money for Gaza, it was for money for Taiwan, it was also money for Haiti. And so, yes, I voted for it. I did. But they also don't discuss is that there have been other bills that were only for funding for Israel where I actually voted no, as well as people understanding that we were in a divided government.
Oh, we have a little bit more here that we can get to, but I want to hear your first thoughts on that, Matt. And also, again, the AIPAC thing, has been one of those things that she's kind of been using as a gotcha. I don't know where and who was doing this AIPAC thing. It is notable, as others people have reported, and been reported by people like Zaid Jilani, that she goes to Israel on a trip that was funded by AIPAC. This is one of those things that is notable for folks to know. Calling it a coordinated,
not AIPAC, the American Israel Education Foundation.
Oh, excuse me.
And, well, that's an important way they get out of this. Is they say like AIPAC, there are many different groups who are distorting our politics toward Israel's ends in terms of displacing Palestinians. Besides AIPAC, Democratic Majority for Israel, any organization that is paying for members of Congress to go to Tel Aviv is not doing so to give them an accurate understanding of the situation there. And also, most importantly, Block the Bombs Act. Be a co-sponsor. Yeah. There you go. Why isn't that happening? Like, it's true that you haven't taken the money from AIPAC, so you can't get hit with those, those images that people do. But that's honestly, Gavin Newsom also thinks that he'll be able to avoid the question just saying, I'm not getting AIPAC funding. It goes deeper than that.
That's a really good point, Matt. And I think it kind of gets to something that is critical here, is that AIPAC has been an organization that has been very much maligned. This is an organization that has been openly at war with like major members of the Democratic Party, not just people like Rashida Tlaib for a long time, right?
Obama.
Yeah, and exactly, and I think you're totally right that this will be a kind of weaselly way to get out of criticism over support for Israel, is hyper focusing on AIPAC so that people miss all of the other ways, that the pro-war, that the pro-apartheid lobby, tries to influence politicians. So that's a very good bit there to kind of note, and I'll play a little bit more of this for us before we go to this Platner thing. But I also just want to note again, I've watched a bunch of these interviews. We've looked into it. It's pretty unclear what her position on this issue is. She keeps on opening up these clips by saying, like, I want to make it clear, I want to set the record straight. And you watch these and you have no clue. I mean, you get a hint, let's say.
I want to put politician speeches into a giant database, and every time they say the phrase, let me be clear, just play the next 20 seconds, because I guarantee it's going to be them obfuscating some shit.
So this is audio only, but this is the same conversation, her kind of talking about Israel.
ICE in 1 year, right now. There are a lot of countries that may say.
So she's, just to give people context, we're not going to play the whole thing. You can find it while the link's below. She's talking about how in this country's government is doing all kinds of horrible things. She's using that to kind of talk about Israel.
We don't like how the United States is moving, but I would hate it if other countries said, we're going to leave the United States because of their leadership. So some people take issue with that, and I'm okay with people disagreeing with my record. I'm not okay with people.
And again, this is her talking about, sorry to give everybody to keep interrupting, but the context here is that she is saying that, like, she wants to walk a fine line between criticizing Israel and criticizing Netanyahu. Obviously, focusing on criticizing Netanyahu over dealing with Israel, right? So this is why, she hasn't, supported efforts, to stop U.S. funding in general, right? She has certain times little caveats that she accepts, certain times there aren't, but this is why.
Disagreeing with something that's been completely mischaracterized in an attempt to distract. Because at the end of the day, when we look at where we are right now, people are talking about affordability and the economy, and people are trying to survive. I have gone in, right after I announced on Monday, on Tuesday, I had the very first joint hearing that I've ever had since I've been in Congress on the Senate side. So the Senate and the House, we came together. We were listening to stories of Latino brothers and sisters who are Americans that have been arrested, that have been shot, that have been charged. And this is what's happening in our country with our own citizens, or the fact that we have a government that decided that during a shutdown, even though they had the money, they weren't going to feed 42 million Americans in this country while sending $40 billion over to Argentina. I am in these fights, right? So there are people that don't want me to talk about that, because when you start to talk about that, well, then you start to realize that maybe the Republicans aren't doing best by the people that are in this country. So I refuse to be distracted. And frankly, we will have a page on our website that deals with where I stand on foreign policy, because you need to know. But frankly, if you have any issues, I'd say go look at Cornyn's record and see what that does, right? It looks a little different, because the last time I checked, Cornyn isn't differentiating between a Netanyahu government or anything. People don't know that the Republicans were putting bills on the floor or resolutions on the floor, basically calling Palestinians Hamas. That is wrong. And I didn't see the outrage because the Palestinian people have been harmed. They have been killed, right? But Israelis have been harmed and killed too. And so I separate the people from Hamas and Netanyahu. And if people disagree with that, I'm good with that. You can disagree with me. Just don't say that I've done stuff that I ain't done. That's the only issue I have.
Well, I think we might disagree. You kind of thing there, Matt?
I mean, support block the bombs. This whole thing of this whole thing of America is doing bad stuff. Yeah, and I support other countries in resisting us doing that.
Well,
yeah. I mean, what? We shouldn't threaten a trade war because Canada played an old clip of Ronald fucking Reagan. I don't quite understand what logic is being done here. Stop giving missiles to Israel. It's not Netanyahu shooting them off.
And again, I think that what's kind of sinister at the end of that clip is this kind of allegation that the pro-Palestinian or the pro-human rights movement has been ignoring the Republicans. And it's actually a very tired talking point that they keep on trotting out. These people get protested all the time. These people are targeted for their war on humanity. No doubt about it. And so to sit here and say that, because that implies that there's something kind of cynical or sinister between people asking, again, somebody who's wanting to be a United States Senator about her record, right? That's an attitude that I think is quite ugly. Please put.
These are all Democrats. Every single one of these. And this isn't just AOC, Rashida Tlaib. Pocan, but all of these people support the Block the Bombs Act. I search Jasmine Crockett's name. Get your name on there. Make it clear.
Yeah, she has plenty of opportunity to do that. And I think we're going to get what we will from her. This interview that we have with Graham Platner is very, very interesting. I was pretty shocked by some of the things we were able to get into. It's very interesting being able to speak with him. The campaign that he's run has been one of the most unique ones that we've seen in a long time. It's interesting seeing somebody who is a genuine outsider engaging in politics. It's interesting hearing about how his military service affects his view on the United States, on politics. And I think most interesting to me was his kind of conception of what the Democratic Party is, what he would like to see changed. It's very interesting to hear a candidate for office speaking so openly and clearly, unlike some folks. So without further ado, let's go over to this Graham Platner interview, folks. You can support the program and all the work that we're doing here at patreon.com/leftreckoning. Please do so. And enjoy this conversation that we have with United States Senate candidate for the Democratic primary in Maine, Graham Platner.
Welcome, Left Reckoners. I'm Matt Leck. With me, as always, David Griscom. Hello, David.
Hey, Matt. Happy to be here.
I am happy to be here as well, and to be joined by Graham Platner. Graham is an American oyster farmer, harbor master, military veteran, and candidate for Democratic nomination for U.S. Senate in Maine, and a very strong one at that. Graham, thanks for joining Left Reckoning.
Hey, thanks a lot, guys. I appreciate you having me.
Now, Graham, you reached out early in your race, and I'll be honest, I have a sort of pattern response that I give to people when they reach out saying, hey, love your, listen to your show, think about running for office. My first thing is don't go into debt and create a big problem with that. But before I could even say that to you, this is our first time speaking face to face, you went out and took a lead in this primary. I'm just curious, this has happened very quickly. What's your relationship been to Mainers and this country? How has that changed in this brief period of this run for office, where you've been sort of invited into Mainers' hearts?
It's I'll be honest, it's real. It's very surreal. And what's most amusing to me is that I'm just saying all the things I've always said. My wife makes this joke. that she's really happy I've done this because now I just get to rant about injustice to other people instead of just doing it at the ceiling at night while we're laying in bed. What's been interesting is that I've been engaged in community organizing for a number of years. I've worked on some projects here locally, been involved in local governance. But like my politics, the things that I'm talking about, this is the stuff that I've always talked about. And, usually people are like, yeah, it sounds pretty good. But, it's not like somebody has been like, you should take that and run for United States Senate. So to run for Senate and to get this feedback in the state and realize just how many people, frankly, are all on the same page. And this is something that, like, I think a lot of us knew this already, but to engage with it directly has been it's been heartwarming. It's been humbling in really wild ways. But it's also been almost like it puts proof to the concept that I think something that you guys, I assume, will probably agree with me on, which is that, like, the material conditions that people live in are making them all recognize what's going on. They might not have the perfect answer to it, but everybody knows that they're being screwed. Everybody knows that they live in a system that is built to screw them. And when you go out and say that out loud and just tell people that the system's not broken, the system's functioning exactly as it's supposed to. And that is to make sure that you work harder and longer and somebody else walks away with all of the money. And everybody agrees with that. And so it's been, for me personally, to just say that on like a more, accessible stage, and then have all these people in my state, and I love Maine deeply. I was born and raised here. It's home. To have all these people, folks who I don't always agree with politically, come out and be like, yeah, exactly that. It's been quite the journey and quite the thing to interact with.
Well, Graham, I want to talk to you a little bit about this because I think one of the things that was really exciting about specifically your campaign launch was, the kind of pitch that you made to everyday working class Americans. And like ever since like this kind of historic defeat for the Democrats with Kamala Harris losing in 2024, there's been a lot of talk about, how to maybe reach folks who voted for Donald Trump. A lot of times it sounds like rhetoric, right? It sounds nice to say like, oh yeah, I want everybody to vote for me. I want to be a candidate for all people. But one of the things that has been kind of appealing about your campaign is that I can imagine the conversations that you're having with Trump supporters and people in your life who you work with and around. And I wanted to just hear from you, when it comes to talking to Trump supporters and bringing them around to, your view of the world, your view of politics, what do those kind of conversations actually sound like?
We are already so close to each other, I think. A lot of guys, I live in a small town. A lot of friends of mine voted for Donald Trump 3 times. They hate big banks. They hate corporations. They hate Silicon Valley and tech nerds. They hate the fact that like they have to eat processed garbage food because it's cheaper and it's harder to afford like good local food. They want that kind of world. Like there's already such a close connection. And when I talk about taxing corporations or breaking up corporations through monopoly law, when I talk about raising taxes on the ultra wealthy, when I talk about expanding programs for, like, for instance, getting rid of private health insurance, which is fleecing everybody and everybody knows it, and replacing it with a program that frankly looks like what I get, which is I get VA healthcare. And I think everybody should get some version of what I get. When I talk, or this is my favorite one, explaining to people the cap on contributions to Social Security. Like every working person, when you tell them what that is and when it was put into place, people are like, that just sounds like it would be good for rich people. And you're like, that's correct, which is why and all you got to do is talk about this stuff in normal words and language and explain why it's bad for you. And people agree. They understand because they also know that this system is screwing them. I think it's actually one of the big, like all after the Harris loss, there was that interview with, I think, Rahm Emanuel. on the New York Times.
Mhm.
And essentially he was like, no, the problem here is that we didn't use the right words to make people think we cared about them. We should have used different words to make them think we cared about them. It's like, what? No, care about them. Have policies that show that you want to improve people's lives. And when you do that, a lot of people will engage with it, which has been my experience. And so I think it's just a matter of, frankly, it's just a matter of talking about reality as it is reality in simple terms. You don't really have to get too in the weeds on nobody. If you start talking about, tax credits or something, like, it just gets people like they check out. But if you just talk about the idea, like, yeah, look, we should take money from the rich people that have been stealing all the money, and they've stolen it because they changed the tax code so they don't get as much, so they don't have as much of a tax burden as you do. People are like, yeah, that seems like a good idea.
Graham, there was a clip that your campaign posted that had a woman that was at one of your town halls, and she started talking about undocumented immigrants.
So what's your plan for the illegals that are in this state that get free benefits?
If you listen to what she was saying, no, just hear me out. If you listen to what she was saying, at its core, she's angry about the exact same things you are. People are propagandized, people are misinformed, but people are not stupid. And we shouldn't treat them as such. People are angry because they know they're being screwed. They might get lied to, they might get taken in. If somebody robs your neighbor's house, you don't go over there and laugh at them afterwards. They've been taken advantage of. And that's what this is. People are being robbed. They're being robbed of their critical thinking. They're being robbed of their empathy. The answer to that is not shame. The answer to that is not anger. The answer to that is empathy and compassion.
Thank you.
And she started getting shouted down by the crowd, and your response was, I think, really great, and which was like, we don't blame propagandized individuals for having been propagandized in this sort of environment. I mean, look around us, look at the disarray our media environment is in. But I think that's sort of the key, or a hopeful promise of your campaign, is that you can synthesize that and basically bring all those people into the same room, and instead of shouting, all of a sudden we're having a political education about our place in the world. Like, that really is the core premise of your campaign, isn't it?
At the end of the day, I have a very class-conscious politics, and I have no patience for people celebrating the suffering of other working-class people, which I see a lot in the liberal kind of media these days, or the pundit class, whatever. People have been lied to, and they've been lied, but the lies have worked primarily because their lives have gotten worse, and nobody seems to be showing up for them. There's an element of this which is just so frustrating. She's like, look, when economic systems begin to fail people, right-wing populism arises to give answers. And it always blames marginalized communities, immigrant groups, those who are weakest. This is like, history just shows that this is what happens. And here we are watching it happen. And it only works when there is not a true answer, right? When there isn't I would say, like a left-wing populism or a progressive populism, a populism that is there to address the underlying economic failures. And we're like living through this. I mean, I learned this as a history major in freshman year. And to now be like living through it and having all of these supposed political geniuses stand around and be like, they're like, well, anything but a more like kind of like left-wing populism, anything but that. And then be confused as to why right-wing populism is working. I don't, this is I forget whose quote this is, but it's, be forgiving with people, be brutal with systems. People live within the conditions and the reality that they exist in. And
Graham, I hate to cut in, but actually, you're on a call with one of the, if not the main author of that phrase, David Griscom, with his work with the Michael Brooks Show. But yeah, 100%. And on that note, I want to let David ask about some other things here, but this is a good time. The solidarity with the Somalis in Maine. That was really great to see. I was unaware Maine had a population of Somalis. I've said this up before on Left Reckoning that the first time I ever saw sort of, I would say, deep Nazi sort of like attitudes was Minnesotans toward the Somali immigrants. I'd seen racism against Native Americans in North Dakota and stuff like that, but when I moved to Minnesota for college and saw that, I was frankly naive at the level of sort of hate. So talk about, showing up for Somalis and, this general Stephen Miller environment we're in right now.
Yeah, I mean, Maine is a very white state. I would think we might be one of the whitest states in the country. Not that I think. We are one of the whitest states in the country. We don't have a lot of diversity up here. However, we do have some very, very vibrant immigrant communities, one of which is the Somali community, primarily down in the Lewiston-Auburn area. And these are people that have come here. I mean, at this point, we're talking like families that have been entrenched here for 30 years. And small business owners, farmers, people who have really just taken to Maine and become part of the fabric of our society up here. But since the beginning, there, of course, was the racist backlash. I mean, I was in high school, must have been around 2000 or 2001, when there was this big, like, Klan/neo-Nazi rally in Lewiston in response to the Somali. I mean, so this has been going on for a long time, but it's been supercharged underneath the rhetoric coming out of the White House now. And when Trump came out last week and directly targeted the Somali community in Minneapolis, many of us, or it was like 2 weeks ago, whenever it was, many of us in the state of Maine were like, well, we want to make sure that the people that are here, who are Mainers, who are part of our community, that type of vitriol does not feel like it's extended to them from their community. And so on Saturday, there was a spectacular event that was organized in Lewiston, and hundreds of Mainers came down from all over the state to stand in solidarity with the Somali community there. And it was a really heartwarming event. But it's really sad to watch people who I know really fall victim to this stuff. People who like 5, 6, 7 years ago really weren't kind of that level of xenophobic. And now, because of the steady diet of just anti-immigrant bullshit that's spewing out of places of power and media apparatus in this country, I've watched people like really begin to say horrific things about immigrants who didn't used to. And I think that's also why it's all the more important that those of us who can, or those of us who have both ability and the inclination to do so, have to very publicly stand in support of our immigrant communities here, because they're part of our world.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I agree 100%. Well, Graham, I want to talk a little bit about, kind of your past and your record. And I think a lot of folks, you're fairly well known now, so I'm not going to have you go through like all of your history here. I wanted to talk to you specifically about 2018, where after you had been deployed multiple times during the global war on terror, you returned to Afghanistan as as a military contractor. And I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about that work, how long you were there, what that experience was like, and also just your general opinion on like the United States government and its relationship with military contractors.
Yeah, so I moved back to Maine in 2016 and had no idea what I was doing with my life. I had been in DC for a few years going to school. At the time, but when I left the service, I had this fantasy I was going to get a college degree. I was going to maybe go work for an intelligence service, something like that. Being in DC for 4 years, that I stopped wanting to do that. We'll just put it that way. But then I didn't know what to do. I mean, I really I'd seen myself as a professional soldier. I'd become very disillusioned with the wars that I had fought in, but also didn't know what else to do. I didn't really have any other obvious skill sets. I mean, I was a machine gun. I was in the infantry and I was a reconnaissance guy. So sadly, those things don't really translate easily to the civilian world. And I'd come back to Maine, didn't really know what to do with myself. And my former platoon sergeant from Fallujah hit me up on Facebook one day and was like, "Hey man, what are you doing?" I'm like, "I don't know. I'm lost. I'm broke. I'm living at my mom's house." And he was like, "Well, in Kabul, there's always work." And I'm like, "Yeah, I know." And because guys like me, we all know that exists as an option. But I don't know. I didn't really have much interest in doing it. But at that point, didn't know what else to do, and was really at a loss as to like who I was. Like that was like the one thing I knew I was good at was working in war zones. So I applied and got hired. A company called Constellus, which this is a whole other story, but Constellus had essentially bought up all the contract companies. It's the story of corporate consolidation extends all the way to the U.S. Department of State and its high-threat security operations. Back in the mid-2000s, there were a bunch of these groups, all started by former special operations guys, bunch of different companies, and they were all vying for these contracts. Over time, those companies were bought and sold, and eventually you had this kind of total consolidation underneath this company called Constellus. And effectively, it was like they could set their own price in some ways, because to meet the requirements of the contract, there were all these very specific things, the kind of people you hire, the kind of training you can conduct. And you can only do it if you have a specific kind of facility. And if you have a specific group of people with a very specific skill set. And they figured this out. So a bunch of hedge funders over time bought it all up and owned everything. By the time I get there, 2018, technically I went to work for a company called International Development Solutions, which then turned into to Triple Canopy. But it's all this, you literally just change your t-shirt. The people are the same, but nothing changes. The day they're like, the contract changed, and everyone on the contract just puts on a different t-shirt, and that's it. Now you work for a new company, but it's all the same stuff. And I was on the ambassador's advance team, so I got to Kabul in January of 2018. I was a driver. I drove an up-armored Land Cruiser, and we essentially did nothing, because the ambassador at that point didn't really leave the green zone. So we would drive 300 yards to the presidential palace, or we'd drive 200 yards to the UN compound. And keep in mind, every time the AMBO left, he needed a full security team, fully staffed. This stuff costs so much money, and it was such you could have fucking walked to these places. It's just security theater. And so I honestly, I got real strong. I lifted a ton of weights, and I ate a lot of, I played a ton of Far Cry. But that was.
Around how long was this, just out of curiosity? Were you there for?
That was 6 months. Yeah. So I did one rotation, came home for a little bit of a training thing I had to do, and then went back. And when I was home, that was when I had this, in the year beforehand, I've been waiting on my security clearance. I'd been in Maine, and I've been introduced to oyster farming as a concept. And I loved it, but also was like, I have a career, kind of, not really, but I thought I did. So I can't do a new thing with my life. I do this other thing. And so I went back to Afghanistan. While I was there in those 6 months, I was like, what the fuck am I doing? I was so angry constantly.
Well, Graham, I wanted to kind of, get to this then. This is a direct experience. I mean, in a lot of ways, you've been very outspoken about United States, American, forever wars, for example. Your perspective on the reliance that this country has on private defense contractors. A lot of times the government, this is my opinion, maybe doing this because it provides a shield of deniability, right? Or the more privatized actors you have out there, it limits the kind of public oversight over American activities abroad. I'm curious, with your direct experience, even though you weren't, in combat with these defense contractors, your kind of perspective on like the United States relationship with defense contractors in general.
I think that might be the case with some of the intelligence services. I will say with the with State Department, we work directly for the Department of State. Like there was no way that if we got in some kind of altercation out in town, that anybody would be able to say that we weren't who we were. I honestly, it's just theft is what that's what it is. It's just grift. These contracts exist. They're huge. They're essentially no bid at this point because getting them you have to meet those very specific requirements. And they don't do anything. We didn't do anything. We had a whole like quick reaction force. The private army, up armored vehicles, belt-fed machine guns. There was this whole idea that if something happened out in the city, like this unit would theoretically go. The thing is, everybody knew that legally they would never be able to go out there because we're not going to send a bunch of private security guys for the State Department out into a foreign nation's capital with belt-fed machine guns to get in a running gunfight. That is the worst idea ever. And yet we paid for it. So we had this whole staff, all these vehicles, and everybody knew it would never be utilized. Meanwhile, by the way, Kabul fell to the Taliban, and that never got used. So clearly it was never going to be used. The thing that it was supposed to be there for, when the day finally came, nobody was willing to because of course not. That's an insane idea. But we paid for it. We paid for it for years, staffing this literally like private army of dudes who everybody knew would never once ever be utilized. And even they knew it. Everybody knew it was like a big joke. And so you're sitting there just watching all of this stuff get done. It costs so much money to happen. And it's just a mechanism of moving taxpayer dollars into private bank accounts. That's it. And I do agree with you. I think there has been an element of privatization in the private military contractor world for deniability. In my experience with what I saw directly, it was far more just about reality.
But as if you're to win as senator of Maine, the way that we spend money, maybe I guess in general our defense budget is huge, but specifically when it comes to these contractors, is that something that you're kind of interested in potentially addressing it in Congress?
Oh yeah. We need to spend a lot less money on defense in this country.
That's the sort of thing, right? Is because we're spending so much money in defense, that's where people know where the money is, and that is eventually going to be people dedicating their lives to it. And I'm curious. The Senate is, this is a lot of power, even more so if we can get you in there and get a bunch of other Senate Democrats to get rid of the filibuster. What sort of imprint do you maybe in addition to the private contractor thing, but just in terms of maybe it is on war powers. You've mentioned Smedley Butler before, I believe in your book list, which I'll shout out Harvey K on it. I'm curious, what? Let's say the Mainers elect you to the Senate, and you're aware of the left. There's a huge part of the left who is not going to be satisfied with you until you are actually proven as a anti-war senator. What is the sort of thing that you could have your eye on?
It is clawing back war powers at this point, especially. Because something that's important. You guys know this, but what's happening in Venezuela, as ridiculous as it is. This is like the Iraq War, but dumber. But it's happening because those in Congress have abdicated their role in war making for decades. What is happening shouldn't even be able to happen. The idea that we're dropping bombs, we've killed almost 100 people with no declaration of anything, that shouldn't even have been an option. But it is because we have watched Congress abdicate its role in war making decade after decade after decade. And Trump is uniquely bad, but what he's able to pull off, it's a systemic failure. And it's also a failure of upholding Congress's constitutional duties. The Constitution is pretty clear about who's supposed to make war in this country. And they've, really since Vietnam, have chosen to not take part in it. So we need to claw that back. Every single stupid military adventure of my lifetime and before seems to stem primarily from the fact that we've let the executive branch just wage war when it feels politically necessary. Not because we have to, but just because we feel like it, or somebody feels like it. So I think that clawing back war powers, passing legislation to make it clear that nobody gets to use military force without votes from the Senate and the House, to me that's key. We need to get this stuff back.
Well, I wanted to pivot a little bit, Graham, to talk about healthcare and just ask you a kind of straight up yes or no question. Do you support Medicare for All?
Yes, 100%.
Yeah. And when you're talking to people about that, is this something that in your experience on the campaign trail that there's still a lot of momentum and enthusiasm about? It is something that, 5 years ago, it felt maybe if not, politically far away, but it felt like something that folks were talking about regularly. It does feel like it's fallen a little bit out of the national discourse. So I want to talk about how, you're kind of campaigning on this issue and how, again, if like you are able to win the primary and then, eventually the Senate seat, how you'll be able to kind of champion something like Medicare for All to win this for everybody in this country.
I'll be blunt. It's pretty much why I'm running for Senate. So I get health care from the VA. It gave me the freedom to start a business. It gave me the freedom to put time and labor and energy into building a life that I love. I get to work on the ocean. I get to work for myself on the sea. I'm a diver and an oyster farmer. It's an idyllic life. But the only reason it happened is because the VA gives me health care, and I don't think about premiums. I don't think about copays. I don't deal with insurance companies. I don't do any of that. I never had to think about it. It gave me a significant buffer, or the ability to take some risks. And those risks have paid off, because I don't think that when you help people, they get lazy. I think when you help people, they do what they want to do. And most people want to create things. They want to build things. They want to live lives of fulfillment. When I talk about Medicare for All, it gets huge cheers at town halls. I know it's no longer the national discussion, but I think that's probably just because the media wanted to stop talking about it. Here in Maine, anyway, the healthcare system is falling apart. Healthcare in rural Maine isn't collapsing next year. It's collapsing now. We are watching hospitals close right now. We had we are down to 2 birthing centers in eastern Maine. When I was born, there were around 6. And the idea that we have less today than 1984, that we as a society have less, it makes no sense. And yet, we're down to 2, both of which are owned by the exact same corporate entity, because everything's been bought up by the same consolidated corporate ownership now. So here in eastern Maine, healthcare is a tangible thing that is impacting people's lives on the regular. And they are seeing it fail. They're dealing with insurance companies. They're dealing with the fact that they pay their premiums. And yet when they go in to get procedures, some AI program tells them that it's not actually covered. Like, that real interaction makes people frustrated and angry, and they should be. And I think that in many ways is reopening that conversation. But we win the primary. I'm going to continue talking about Medicare for All. This is an opportunity for me, which is very strange because I never thought I'd be in this position, but it's an opportunity for me personally to inject something I think is like the most important thing for us to do right now in our political system, besides getting money out of politics. That's a whole other ballgame, though. But having universal health care is the key to whatever we do next. And I want to force that conversation.
Awesome.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you this then too. I think they're connected here. In the past, when asked, you said that you aren't a socialist. I was curious what your view of the American economic system is today, right, and how it's working for everyday working class people.
Well, it's not. It doesn't work for working class people, and it wasn't supposed to. It wasn't designed to, and we can know that because you just look at a system and see what its outcomes are. And if its outcomes are continuously the accrual of wealth and power in very, very small places at the diminishment of conditions for working people, and you keep finding yourself back there over and over and over again, which we continually do, then obviously that's the purpose. That's what it's trying to do. I call myself an economic populist. I'll be very blunt. I know all of these terms have academic meanings. That actually means something. In today's political discourse, none of this shit means anything. They called Hillary Clinton a communist.
Fair enough. Yeah.
Like there is a. And what worries me sometimes is we often get bogged down in the weeds about how we're defining ourselves, and it turns into this whole other conversation. And I, quite frankly, I think in that larger political conversation, people are not using these words in the academic sense. They're not using them in the sense of that they actually have meaning. They're just using them in they get thrown around as some kind of signifier of something, but it's not. It doesn't have any deeper meaning to it. So, sorry. So for me, it's just pushing policies that are going to raise taxes on the wealthy, claw back money from the wealth that's been accrued because it's been stolen from working people for generations at this point, breaking up monopolies, using anti-monopoly laws we already have on the books, but bringing in new ones, I should hope. Utilizing the power of the federal government to expand the social programs universal programs that should be universal and that we should expand, and then also probably bring in new ones like Medicare for All, some kind of universal healthcare system. I don't care what people call me. Those are the things that I'm going to fight for, because those are the things that are going to improve the lives of working class Americans, and that's what I care about.
Well, yeah, I would just note on that quick, David. We supported Bernie Sanders in the 2020 and the 2016 elections. He did take time to define democratic socialism. As much as I liked it at the beginning of that campaign, I don't know that it did a whole lot. I think maybe in politics, showing is more important than telling when it comes to some of this stuff. But calling to go at. People know who the enemy is. I think that's the most important thing. These big tech firms, big banks still, haven't really dealt with that. Scott Bisson all of a sudden talking about we need to lower regulations. But anyway, David, I jumped in.
Oh, no, I wanted to kind of follow up on that when it comes to labels. So you're running in the Democratic Party primary. That's been a party that, has some very proud traditions of that's what we could call economic populism. It is also a party that played a major role in neoliberalism. And I wanted to kind of ask, your thoughts about one, running as a Democrat, and two, how you intend to kind of relate to the party, because the Democratic Party is a quote, like a big tent party. There's a lot of factions within it. And I'm just curious, you as a candidate, you as somebody who describes yourself as an economic populist, how you are relating to that label and to that party in general.
I definitely flirted extensively with running as an independent. My critique of the political system in this country extends not just to Republicans, but to the system as a whole. That being said, I also have a power analysis which makes me want to go after the most likely way of getting this stuff done. What's the most likely way for us to be able to build power and seize power and get power? And to do that, currently, it still does seem that working within the larger party apparatus is a necessity. The other thing, too, though, is I've been a registered Democrat for my whole life. And that's because I did at one point, I thought it was the party of labor unions and the party of working people. I thought it was the party of Social Security and Medicaid and Medicare. If I'm any kind of Democrat, I'm a New Deal Democrat. I believe that what was done under FDR was a move in the right direction. I think the Economic Bill of Rights should have happened. We didn't. It was close, but then the post-war turn happened and we lost it all. I think we live in a much different society had we had something like a jobs guarantee, or if we guaranteed housing, but and healthcare. So for me, it's both tactical, but it's also somewhat philosophical, I guess, in the sense that these are the mechanisms that exist. Had I done this as an independent, I wouldn't be where I am. I know that for a fact. Had I done this had I tried to do some third party thing, nobody would even know who I am, and we wouldn't be having this conversation. And we wouldn't be having the ability to re-inject the conversation about universal health care back into the national media or back in the national conversation. But I also think, as I go around Maine, I talk to a lot of Democrats. They almost all agree with me. If the Democratic Party represented the will of the membership of the Democratic Party, it would not be in line with corporate interests. It would be the party of labor unions. It would be the party of trying to get money out of politics. It would be the party of going after corporate power, because that's what everybody wants. The problem is that power's been seized. Power's been taken at the highest echelons of the party, and it is in bed with the exact same corporate apparatus that the Republican Party is. I'm okay with the Democratic Party being a big tent party. I don't require everybody to have my same ideology or my same politics. I'll say this. Corporate power, the billionaire class, or the billionaires that want to stay billionaires, they have no place in this party. Make them go to the Republican Party. Make them go figure out if their social liberalism can't coincide with their economic needs. Make them have that fight over there. That shouldn't be our fight. If they decide that they care about gay marriage more than they care about their money, then let them come back and we'll tax them. But if they want to, that shouldn't be our problem. Make that a Republican problem. And the problem that we have is that we have allowed in that corporate influence, and now people get to whitewash themselves, right? Like they're going to be like, well, I don't want to raise taxes on the rich, but I'll have a float in the gay pride parade, and therefore you can't yell at me. No. Make that guy have that argument over in the Republican Party. So, I don't believe that there's been this thing recently about the big tent being like Zohran Mamdani to Joe Manchin. I don't want Joe Manchin.
Well, last question then. Do you think the party needs new leadership?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, the party needs to be rebuilt from the ground up. I want to make it very clear. I'm not a reform candidate. I'm not here to go down and convince everybody that they should change their minds. We need to rebuild a movement within the party to take it over. We need to build power at the ground level, at the state level, the county level. We need to rebuild the Democratic Party as an actual political party that has an actual political ideology that it's trying to accomplish. And we need to take it from below. Because there are going to be people at the top who will work with us and I think are very sympathetic. But those in leadership at the moment will never be sympathetic, and we have to replace them.
Well, Graham Platner. Graham, I just want you to mention I know you got unions actually did support your candidacy. Talk a little bit about that, and then tell people where they can join the fight.
Yeah, so me getting into this was part of a project to recruit a working class candidate to run on working class issues. And so part of that project were people affiliated with unions in the state of Maine. So early on, I had a lot of union support. I'll say this is one of the reasons why organized labor is so important. it was that support early that allowed us to be able to build this thing. I have no money. This was not my idea. And I have no like inroads into like the big political world. I could not have built this thing without a lot of help. But that help was made available primarily because of support from labor unions. And so it forward to a future in which people like me can run for this kind of office, it is very clear that we need to strengthen labor, because that's where a lot of that early initial support came from. I mean, it's one of the many reasons. I mean, I'm just ideologically a pro-labor candidate. But just practically in what I've gone through over the past few months, it's that existing support network that only comes from organized workers that really allowed us to build this thing. So that's I think it's pretty key, because I want to see more of this. We win this thing, we got to start targeting Senate races all over the place. The Senate is the place to do it, especially in these kind of rural states where we don't have big populations, where we can find people like me. I'm not unique. There's tons of people like me out there. There's tons of hardworking folks who give a shit about their communities and have decent politics. So it's really a matter of how do we build a mechanism to find them and support them? Because we're, at the end of the day, we're not going to we can't convince enough people. We got to build power. We got to take power. That's what we have to do. That's how we're going to win this thing. And for anybody who likes the sound of that and wants to support it, grahamforsenate.com is the website. We don't take any money from corporate PACs. We only take individual donations, small dollar donations. We'll take PAC money, but it has to be from labor or some ideologically aligned group. We don't take money from people who we don't know where it came from. So because of that, we're still very reliant on small dollar donations. We can use whatever help you can give. But the big thing is time and getting involved. If you want to sign up as a volunteer, we've got 12,000 volunteers already. Wow, which is amazing for a state like Maine. We only have 1.4 million people in the state. If you're not in the state of Maine, you can still help with text banking and still help with phone banking. There's still plenty to do. But more importantly, I would just say this. Go find a community group that is organizing in your area and get involved. Just spend time doing it. Whether it's a political group, whether it's a food pantry, whether it's around some local issue that nobody's ever heard of but matters to your community, go find somebody, go to meetings, spend time in the real world with other people, and learn how to build power. Mm-hmm. Because if we don't do that, none of this is going to matter. It is more important than anything else that you go learn how to organize and build trust and relationships with people in your community, because that's where the future lies.
Well, Graham, really, it is such a pleasure to be able to speak with you here on Left Reckoning. Thank you so much for joining us and being generous with your time.
No, thank you guys. I really appreciate it.
Well, Matt, that was a lot of fun, wasn't it?
Very fun and surreal experience to finally get a chance to talk with Graham.
It's interesting having a listener on the program. It's always fun.
Yeah, it's always good to talk with listeners.
No, Graham's campaign is very interesting. I think, if you had any questions about it, I think you can see why we have been so interested in covering it on this program. Well, a lot more coming, folks. This Sunday, we got our bonus episode. We're going to be deep diving into Mr. James Tallarico and his campaign for Senate here in Texas. You won't want to miss that. You get access at patreon.com/leftreckoning. We got a lot of fun stuff coming up. Pretty soon, we're going to have our LR yearly tradition, Bum Steer of the Year. I'm really looking forward to seeing who's made the naughty list and the not so naughty list. It's always a lot of fun. And don't forget to check us out over on the Jacobin program, on the Jacobin YouTube show. And obviously, you know where to find Matt every weekday at the Majority Report. Anything else, Matt, before we let everyone go?
Nope. Just patreon.com/leftreckoning. Help us keep the lights on.
Hell yeah. Take care, friends.